The other man in the room added 2 stars would mean an immediate threat. She assured them that the current report wasn't urgent but promised to investigate further. Before he left, she thanked him for bringing the information forward, suggesting it might help their ongoing efforts. As the man exited the office, he noticed a calico cat brushing against his boot. When he asked about the cats, the other man explained, "They keep the mice away. Mice love to eat paper, and we've got plenty of that here." On his way back to the boarding house, the weather turned unexpectedly warm. The man arrived, sweating from the heat, and was greeted by the woman managing the house. She handed him a sealed envelope, warning, "Bad news usually comes by special delivery." He hesitated before opening it, recognizing the sender as the colonel's office from his regiment. Inside, he found orders that hit him hard. He was being summoned to Montgomery for a court of inquiry. Under escort, he would have to face an investigation into his actions, with the possibility of a court-martial looming over him. The boarding house manager noticed his reaction and gently patted his shoulder, asking if someone he knew had passed away. Struggling to find the words, he managed to explain his situation. The weight of what was coming next hung heavy on him as he processed the news in silence. The town of Montgomery in southern Missouri, nestled in the Ozarks, stood as a symbol of the changes wrought by the Curian order. It was a fortified community resembling medieval villages of old, where stout buildings served as protection and the people relied on one another for safety and survival. Nights were especially dangerous, with everyone staying indoors and trusting only familiar faces. Communication was limited to rare radio broadcasts or printed materials, and even more rarely, telephone calls. In this town, Jackson Elementary School was a central structure fortified to protect against external threats. The school, with its bricked-up windows and sandbagged rifle loopholes, also featured a watchtower and a fireproof roof, making it a defensive stronghold. Inside, in an old library-turned-courtroom, a tense military inquiry unfolded. At the center of the proceedings sat a stern woman in a heavy coat, her presence commanding respect. To her side, an older officer observed the room with tired eyes. Across from them was a younger officer, clearly agitated. A man sat near them, dressed neatly in pressed clothing, exuding an air of restrained frustration. His tightly bound hair and set jaw reflected his inner turmoil. This was no ordinary hearing, it was a matter of life and death. The inquiry focused on whether the man, a lieutenant, had disobeyed orders during a critical battle at Little Timber Hill. The charges were brought by another officer, now recovering in a hospital. It was evident that the accuser sought to deflect blame for the disastrous outcome onto the lieutenant. The hearing had dragged on for days, with the man becoming increasingly aware of the political games at play. The charges, if proven, could lead to a court-martial and a possible death sentence. The prosecuting officer laid out the accusations, claiming that the lieutenant had abandoned a strategic position despite being ordered to hold it. The decision to retreat was based on intelligence about a dangerous enemy force, information that some in the room dismissed as reliable. The prosecutor painted the retreat as reckless, emphasizing the risks taken by the soldiers during the night march. The defense, led by a captain to represent the lieutenant, countered the claims. He argued the command, he had the authority to make decisions for the safety of his troops. The retreat, though controversial, was justified under the circumstances. The captain pointed out that making tough calls under fire would discourage decisive leadership, particularly predictable conditions faced by the wolves. Throughout the hearing, the presiding officer maintained strict control, ensuring the arguments stayed focused on the facts. Composed, though it was clear he felt the weight of the accusations. When asked if he had anything to say, he chose silent, a calculated move encouraged by his counsel. Missed from the room while a decision was deliberated, the man found a familiar face waiting for him. An old a different unit greeted him warmly. Their brief conversation offered a moment of relief amid the tension, comrade even presenting a gift of whiskey from former platoon members. The lieutenant, knowing he needed a clear head for what lay ahead. As they spoke, the man's resolve remained strong. He knew the inquiry was more than just a question of his actions, it was a test of his character and his ability in the waters of military politics. Despite the uncertainty, he held on to a quiet hope that justice would prevail. The man stood firmly before a U-shaped table, conducting the inquiry. The colonel began, acknowledging him as a commendable officer choice. The report, which the man had sworn to, detailed his actions regarding him as captain to defend a specific location. The colonel explained that only a court-martial had disobeyed that order. The news sank heavily, as a trial would undoubtedly tarnish his career, even if he were proved. The colonel, however, offered an alternative resignation. Stepping down, he could avoid the court-martial, serve in a different capacity, or even return home. The choice was advised careful consideration, warning of the complicated military trials. Seeking time to think, he asked for a day to decide. The colonel granted it, leaving the room alongside 2 other officers. After their departure, another officer voiced frustration, believing the situation should never have escalated. Speculated about connections and enemies in higher places, questioning why this complaint wasn't dismissed outright. That evening, the man gathered with a few companions for drinks. The informal gathering turned into a bittersweet farewell to his colonel. As the night wore on, most of the group drowned his frustrations in bourbon. He ended up strangers in a rundown bar, forming fleeting friendships with those drawn by the liquor. Exhausted, he eventually collapsed on the shack's floor, finding it more appealing than returning to his assigned quarters. A sharp voice jolted him from his drunken haze. A woman, familiar but unexpected, helped him to his feet with surprising strength. She guided him to a secluded house, where they descended into a basement that she had made live. The woman admitted to attending his hearing secretly, listening from a hidden spot. She criticized his decision not to defend himself more robustly and advised him to resign to avoid further complications. Despite his initials, their conversation was left unresolved as she insisted they discuss it further after rest. The next morning, the man awoke to the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. The woman, resourceful, offered him a simple breakfast of eggs and bread. Over the meal, she hinted at her knowledge of his past, referencing reports that dangerous enemies. She alluded to a deeper connection between their paths but left much unsaid, promising to share more when the time was right. Though still grappling with his uncertain future, the man found himself intrigued by the woman's enigmatic presence and insights. Determination and straightforward nature challenged him to reconsider his approach to the challenges ahead. Simple meal. While processing the new information, she mentioned a figure of interest, someone she had heard about before, a high-ranking individual with possible questionable loyalties. They also discussed a peculiar train, noted for it didn't match the standard practices of small, discreet movements. While they speculated about its purpose, the man reminded her that facts were more valuable than guesses. Shifting the conversation to her about the events at a location she had recently visited, she described how she had managed to create an illusion of a well-guarded camp, keeping enemies at bay. Her tactics had worked. No attacks came during the night, although aerial threats observed from dare to approach. Before dawn, a group of armed individuals climbed the hill. Unlike their usual demeanor, they appeared confused and uncoordinated, even speaking among themselves, a rarity for their kind. This anomaly made her suspect something unusual about their nature. Despite the danger, she slipped away unnoticed in the darkness. How she came to know about all this information, she admitted it was through someone who thought it was important to share it with him. She hinted at wanting to collaborate on an upcoming mission, something she couldn't achieve alone. When asked why she sought his help, she revealed that it could be part of a rare opportunity to train another specialist like herself. Later, as the man reflected on his next steps, he drafted a resignation letter. It was brief, expressing his intent to avoid the troubles of a formal inquiry. When he presented the letter to his superior, she accepted it, expressing regret at losing a capable officer. The conversation turned personal, involving his father, a man who had once inspired her during a challenging time. Her words offered him both encouragement and a perspective on resilience. Afterward, the two prepared for their journey. She had already gathered supplies, choosing for the road ahead. Their destination lay beyond familiar borders, and they would be traveling light, relying on the provisions she had secured. As they passed through the gates of their current location, they exchanged thoughts about the common oppression. The man reflected on his past experiences in less forgiving territories, while she spoke of the renewed hope she always felt when returning to places untouched by tyranny. Their path took them through dense forest roads marked with remnants of the past. The people who lived there clung to the names and memories of earlier times, that the future could mirror the peace of those bygone days. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, the pair shared a quiet understanding of why they, despite the overwhelming odds. It was not just for survival, but for the possibility of a free from fear and oppression. They arrived at the smithy and outbuildings in the early afternoon, hearing faint hammering sound workshops. The area was nestled between hills, with a stream flowing down to a half-pond, half-swamp on the opposite side of the road. A pair of large dogs trotted up to them, barking loudly. A young boy, not much older than 10, asked who they were and what they wanted. After being told about the visitor and his need for a weapon, the boy prowled inside,